Integration often forces minority communities to continuously adjust to institutions designed around majorities' culture, even when they have already reached the threshold of being a significant and protected constituency within the state. And we point out, easily from Joseph alone, that this is especially unfair when their population is large enough to sustain meaningful economic participation, create cross community exchange, contribute to local markets, and justify institutions that reflect their own social, religious, and cultural needs, which is, by the way, is still it's still unclear from LO how do they provide these differences or they provide specialized policies for them, especially when these indifferences will still remain in their side. So therefore, a lot of people cannot simply win how they vote over this specific policy simply because all of the democratic voting will still happen on the basis of the majority. So it's not like you will suddenly have a protection control over religious practices of Muslims that moves over to Peru, for example, when you do this in the first place. So in that context, forcing them to integrate does not simply mean more inclusion. We say that this simply means assimilation into a system that were never built with them in mind, and that's not how you protect these identities, and that's not how you create a prosperous society in the first place. First push. Integration does not normalize diversity, contrary to what LO said, when contact occurs under scarcity, suspicion, and majoritarian control. Opposition's first assumption here is that social contact naturally produces more tolerance, but we say that this is untrue. We point out that contact only produces normalization when the parties meet under conditions of relative equality, security, institutional protection, and sufficient resources. But in states carrying massive refugee population, like for example in Pakistan, that is not an ordinary condition. The ordinary condition is economic scarcity. You already have overpopulated spaces in Pakistan, for example. You have weak enforcement of minority rights and political environment where refugees are easily blamed for domestic failure. Look at what happened to America back then, and this also happens in other examples here within the motion heavily. So the strat of Gov here is simple. You first create a protected separation, then controlled interaction if possible afterwards. So opposition thinks that the mere act of placing refugees and locals in the same schools, hospitals, workplaces, and neighborhood will just suddenly normalize diversity, especially when they will look weird. They will look like something different from their practices. Even then, even if you try to do this in the long run, just take a look at America, for example. You still face a lot of racism against black people, even though they're integrated within the society. The problem is you need to quote unquote prioritize this protection first in order for you to gain political and administrative leverage over the policies that will be thrown upon you. That is like throwing two frightened cats into the same cage and blaming them when they scratch each other. No, this is a priority debate. We don't need to bar anything. We only put the other into a more pedestalized outcome. Therefore, we put more generation, we put more efforts towards policy building when it comes to building this autonomous settlements in the first place. Few points under this. First, integration places the refugees and citizens in direct competition over the same scarce goods, like jobs, housing, classroom slots, maybe hospital access, for example, wherein already in this state you have a limited infrastructure towards this. So when refugees are immediately absorbed into the same system, the host population does not experience them as community to be understood. It experiences them, in fact, as a competing class. And we say that this gives prejudice a material language, e.g., locals can just simply say that refugees depress wages and increase rent pressure and overcrowded schools. So this leads to more resentment and proves our point in the first place. So on the comparative, whether or not those claims are empirically fair, they become politically persuasive because integration makes refugees visibly present inside the same strained institution. It is easier for people to create social lobbying and to vote for politicians that will hate them, just like what happened in America. But then LO said, oh no, you alienate them even further and you won't have any prosperous policies for them. This is the comparative that they have missed when it comes to policy control. We point out that policies are decided by voting majority. So refugees start with little real control in their side, and even if law promises equality, rules on housing, etc., etc., it's not like you're going to create a specialized law for this protected identities in the first place just because you vote within the same democratic bloc, which is, by the way, filled in by the majority of the host locals in the first place. So autonomy gives them protected space wherein you can actually create your own basic survival law, for example, and you can actually vote for local politicians that will represent for you. So it's easier for us to protect these identities when you have those laws in the first place and you have administrative control over your own needs. So their response to this is that proximity exists. That's why integration is a lot easier, simply doesn't stand, because this is unresponsive to what we point out. But before I move, I'll take POI. 3, 2, 1. Okay, number one, your political actions does not simply mean that resentment would not happen. Just because the leader of Pakistan accepted a lot of refugees, that doesn't mean that the locals accept them, especially when there's also another political conservative wings that can blast them out. Especially when, number one, the states already have a lot of problem within their own state. Number two, there's a lot of scarcity for resources for them. The problem is that this is psychologically more likely to happen for a lot of locals, and resentment is far worse on your side, and this makes them vote for policies that alienates them even more because you hate them, because they take job for you. And number three, this is also a strat for leaders or opposition leaders that wants to take out your wants to take out your current political leaders, for example, like what Trump did to Biden, using this resentment to pull more leverage and creating alienating policies or propagandas afterwards to gain stability within the run. So in their side, you cannot do this successfully when you place them in an administrative protection that cannot be easily skewed over by another executive order from a president, for example. So in their side, it doesn't matter whether you vote for Trump, you vote for leaders that wants to alienate them. You make it harder for them to do this specific run in the first place, because again, these are lawful and administrative control when you have an autonomous region for them, or maybe you have an autonomous settlement for them. So in opposition, resentment is settled at the level of everyday life, in schools, workplaces, rental markets, etc. That is the worst place to settle it, because refugees meet the majority as isolated individuals with less money, weaker documents, no vote, or at least less legal protection. So in our side, we create an identity for them, one that can be be taken care of by a lot of politicians, for example, like the national leaders. They will actually have more propensity to care for them because they know that they are now a more cohesive unit that can vote for you, and it's also within those within those institutional voting block in the first place that you need to gain leverage from. Very proud to propose.